The first man to laugh at Miriam Caldwell's stone hut was the same man who would later stand outside it with frost in his beard, unable to speak. In late October of 1883, 3 miles north of Judith Basin, Montana, her new home looked like a mistake. Low walls, heavy roof, almost no windows, half the north side swallowed by the hillside. From the trail, it looked less like a house and more like a grave built above ground. Jacob Hartley called it that at the settlement store. A grave. He said it loud enough for every man near the stove to hear. Then he smiled and asked how long a widow with 2 children expected to last inside a pile of rocks once real winter arrived. Miriam heard about it before sundown. She said nothing. She had learned that men who mocked a thing before testing it were usually afraid of being wrong. She was 34. Her husband had died 2 winters earlier when his freight wagon broke through river ice. The river gave back the wagon. It did not give back Thomas Caldwell. After that, people expected Miriam to fold, sell the claim, move closer to town, marry again if she was lucky. But luck had not fed her children. Work had. Her old log cabin had nearly killed them the winter before. Wind came through the chinking like needles. Smoke backed down the chimney when snow packed the roof. Her son Eli woke with blue lips one morning, his little hands stiff inside wool mittens he had worn to bed. That was the morning Miriam stopped trusting timber. All spring she remembered her father's voice. He had been a Cornish stonemason in southern Colorado, a quiet man with cracked hands and no patience for waste. He used to say wood gives heat away like a drunk gives away coins. Stone keeps what it earns. So in May, while other families planted and patched fences, Miriam began hauling rock. Sandstone from the ridge, riverstone from the creek, limestone from a buffalo wallow nobody used. She dragged them on a sled made from broken wagon boards until her shoulders burned and her palms split. Neighbors asked what she was building. A fence, one man joked. Miriam wiped blood on her skirt and said, "Something like that." By July, the walls started rising. Not high, not pretty, thick, 2 feet at the base, clay and sand mortar, a weighted string from her father's old tool roll. Every stone set like it had a job to do. Raymond Voss, the carpenter, rode out twice to watch. The second time he shook his head. He told her stones sweated, said it would mold, said it would freeze her from the inside out. Miriam kept working. The north wall went into the hill. The other walls were banked with earth and sod. The roof sat low, layered with logs, clay, and more sod. Inside, the ceiling barely reached 7 feet. Heat would have nowhere to climb and vanish. She built the firebox against the west wall with dense riverstone. The chimney was short, just enough draw for smoke, not enough to steal the room's warmth. 2 small south windows were covered with oiled canvas. The door was thick pine, sunk deep into a stone frame. It looked crude. It was not crude. It was a machine for surviving winter. By September, the hut was finished. Her children hated it at first. Eli said it felt like living underground. Little Ruth asked if the sun had forgotten them. Miriam lit a small fire and told them to wait. By morning, the coals were nearly dead. The room was still warm. That was the first secret. Stone did not rush. It took heat slowly. Then it returned it slowly, like a good promise. At the store, the jokes grew meaner. Jacob Hartley said she had built a root cellar and crawled inside it. Men laughed because Jacob owned cattle, hired hands, and liked being obeyed. Then he leaned near the stove and said, "When that roof caves in, don't ask me to dig her out." Nobody laughed at that, not right away. Miriam heard that too. That night she sat beside the fire after the children slept. Her husband's old coat hung by the door. For one weak moment she pressed her face into it and let herself miss him so hard it felt like sickness. Then the wind tapped the canvas window and she stood back up. Winter did not care about grief. The first snow came on November 2nd, then more. The creek sealed over. The grass vanished. By the middle of the month, the whole basin had gone silent under white. On November 18th, the mountains disappeared behind a wall of storm. The wind came first, then snow so hard it erased distance. By dusk, fences were buried. By midnight, cabins shook like boxes. The cold found every bad joint, every lazy nail, every crack a man had promised to fix later. In Judith Basin, fires roared all night. Men fed stoves until their woodpiles sank. Women stuffed rags under doors. Children slept beside hearths in coats and boots. 3 miles north, Miriam shut her pine door, placed one log on the fire, and waited. By dawn, the storm had teeth. Jacob Hartley woke to frost inside his cabin. His water bucket had skimmed over. The far wall was white around the cracks. He cursed his stove, cursed the wind, cursed the man who had sold him green wood. By noon, he had burned through more fuel than he planned for 2 days. Raymond Voss did better, but not by much. His cabin was tight by frontier standards. Heavy logs, good hearth, clean chimney. Still, his children huddled near the fire while the corners froze hard enough to shine. At the church, families began gathering, not for prayer, for body heat. Miriam's hut stayed quiet. The fire burned down. The stone drank it in. Eli and Ruth slept in the loft without coats. Miriam touched the wall near the floor. Warm, not hot, not smoky, just steady. Outside, the blizzard screamed over the roof and slid past the earth-banked walls like it could not find the house properly. On the second day, the temperature fell to 40 below. That was when people stopped joking. The store stove ran without rest. Men carried in broken crates. Someone burned a chair leg. Mrs. Brennan, the school teacher, abandoned her cabin after ice formed inside her wash basin and did not melt beside the hearth. Jacob Hartley broke apart a table before sundown. He did it with an axe, in front of his hired men, pretending it did not shame him. But it did, because all summer he had laughed at a widow for wasting labor on stone. Now his own house was eating wood like a starving animal, and still his hands would not warm. Miriam used that logs that day. 4. 1 in the morning, 1 at dusk, 2 through the long night when the wind pressed snow against the door, and the whole world outside turned blind. Ruth woke once and asked if the storm would take the roof. Miriam listened. The roof did not groan. The walls did not tremble. The chimney drew clean. "No," she said, "not this one." On the third day, fear settled over the basin. Wood piles were low. Men stopped feeding full fires and began rationing flames. Children cried from cold and were told to be brave. Horses froze in sheds. Wells locked solid. Smoke blew backward from chimneys and filled rooms with coughing. The storm did not care who had laughed. Inside the stone hut, Miriam made cornmeal mush and warmed coffee. Eli played checkers with black and white stones near the hearth. Ruth drew shapes in the dust on the floor. For the first time since Thomas died, Miriam watched her children in winter and did not feel hunted. That was the second secret. Warmth was not comfort. Warmth was power. On the fourth morning, the wind stopped. The silence was almost worse. Doors opened across Judith Basin. People stepped into a hard blue world and counted what winter had taken. Roofs sagged. Wood piles were gone. One shed had collapsed. The church smelled of smoke, wet wool, and fear. North of the settlement, trapper Colin Mathers came down from the breaks, half frozen and stumbling. He had survived 3 nights in a cave and was trying to reach town when he remembered the widow in the stone hut. He expected smoke damage, a frozen door, maybe worse. Miriam opened before he knocked twice. Warm air rolled over him. Colin stood there with ice in his beard, staring past her shoulder. The children were alive. The room was calm. The fire was nothing but coals, and still the hut held heat like a living body. He stepped inside and removed his gloves. Then he touched the wall. He looked at Miriam's wood stack under the lean-to. Most of it remained. "How much did you burn?" he asked. Miriam looked at the pile, then back at him. "Not enough to worry." By evening, Colin had reached the settlement. He told them what he saw. At first, men dismissed him, said cold had scrambled his head, said no stone hut stayed warm at 40 below, with a coal bed and a widow's woodpile. Then Jacob Hartley asked one question too quickly. "How much wood?" And everyone heard the fear under it. The visits began the next day. Not all at once. Pride travels slower than curiosity. One man rode north to check on her. Another came to ask about the creek path. Mrs. Brennan brought bread she did not need to bring. Raymond Voss arrived with no excuse at all. They all stepped inside and went quiet. No ice on the inner walls, no damp corners, no smoke stink, no frozen floor, just even warmth, low and patient, sitting in the stone. Raymond inspected every joint like a man searching for a way to protect his old opinion. He checked the ceiling, the mortar, the door frame, the north wall buried in earth. Miriam let him look. At last he stood near the firebox, hat in hand, and said the hardest words a proud man can spend. "I was wrong." Miriam nodded once. She did not smile. That made it worse. Jacob came last. He did not come alone. Men like Jacob rarely faced humiliation without witnesses they could control. He rode up with two hands behind him and acted as if he had come to offer help. But the moment he stepped inside, the room betrayed him. His eyes went to the children first, healthy, warm, playing near the hearth. Then to the woodpile visible through the small rear opening, still high, higher than his had been before he started burning furniture. Nobody spoke. Jacob took off one glove and touched the wall. His face changed. Not much, just enough. Because he understood before he admitted it. The widow had not survived by luck. She had outbuilt him, outplanned him, outlasted him. And every man in that room knew it. Samuel Pritchard came later with a thermometer from St. Louis. He took readings morning, noon, and night. Outside stayed below freezing. Inside barely moved. 65, 68, 71, back to 67 by morning. He counted her fuel over a week, fewer than 20 logs. His cabin burned more than 40 and still had cold corners. Numbers did what shame could not. They ended the argument. By January, nobody called it a grave. By February, men were asking Miriam how deep to bank the walls, how low to set a ceiling, which stone held heat best, how short a chimney could be before smoke became a problem. She answered when asked, "Nevermore." That was what cut Jacob the deepest. She did not punish him. She did not boast. She did not drag his words back through the store and lay them at his feet. She simply lived warm while he remembered breaking his own table for firewood. In spring, stone piles appeared across Judith Basin. Not all huts. Some families built winter rooms inside cabins. Some widened hearths into thick heat walls. Jacob Hartley built a stone bunkhouse for his ranch hands and told people it was his idea. Nobody believed him. Raymond Voss began adding earth-banked stone rooms to new cabins and charged extra for the work. But each time he explained the method, someone would ask where he learned it, and he would have to say her name. Miriam Caldwell, the widow in the stone hut. Years later, people would forget the jokes. They would forget the men at the store, the frozen basins, the broken furniture, even the exact number of logs she burned in that blizzard. But Jacob never forgot standing inside that warm room with his glove in his hand, feeling the wall return heat he had not earned. He had wanted her to fail because her survival made his certainty look small. That was what he lost. Not cattle, not money, not land. The right to be believed without question. Miriam gained something quieter and harder to take. When winter came after that, no one pitied her children. No one called her strange. No one looked at the low stone hut and saw a grave. They saw smoke rising from a short chimney. They saw a woodpile that lasted. They saw a door set deep into stone with warm light behind it. And inside, Miriam Caldwell sat near the fire, while Eli and Ruth slept above her, the walls holding the day's heat through the long Montana night.